Texas Giant Roller Coaster. On July 19, 2013, in Arlington, Texas, the new Texas Giant was running its normal evening schedule at Six Flags Over Texas. The ride had reopened just 2 years earlier after a $14 million refurbishment that converted its old wooden structure into a steel hybrid track. Rosa Ayala Gaona Esparza was a 52-year-old Dallas resident and mother who had come to the park that evening with her son and her future son-in-law. The three of them climbed into the front car of the train, the seat closest to the descent. As the attendant walked the platform locking the restraints, Esparza said something to him. A rider seated directly in front of her overheard it. She told the attendant her lap bar did not feel secure. The attendant checked the bar. The safety system showed locked. He later told police the bar was a little high or not as tight as it should be. He sent the train. The coaster climbed the lift hill, crested the first drop, and entered a banked turn at roughly 6:30 in the evening. As the train pitched into the curve, Esparza was ejected from her seat. She fell approximately 75 feet. On the way down, she struck a metal support beam, and her body came to rest on the roof of the tunnel where the ride departs. Park staff cleared the area and called for paramedics. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, later released to Time magazine, found that her body had been partially severed by the impact with the support beam. The cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries. Six Flags closed the ride for an internal and external review and reopened it that September after replacing a defective restraint limit switch in the exact car Esparza had been riding in. Her family's wrongful death lawsuit settled in 2014 for undisclosed terms. Texas City Grandcamp. On April 16, 1947, in Texas City, Texas, dock workers loading the French Liberty ship SS Grandcamp at Pier O noticed smoke rising from one of the cargo holds shortly after 8 in the morning. The ship was carrying 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer bound for war-ravaged Europe. Texas City Volunteer Fire Chief Henry J. Baumgartner responded with all 4 of the department's fire engines. He had led the volunteer department for years. The ship's crew had already tried to fight the fire the way they had been trained to fight a shipboard fire. They closed the hatches and injected steam into the hold. Baumgartner's crews ran hoses across the pier and onto the ship to fight the fire from the deck. The steam, instead of smothering the fire, fed it. Ammonium nitrate is an oxidizer. It supplies its own oxygen, and the temperature inside the hold climbed past the point where the cargo became unstable. Down on the waterfront, crowds had gathered to watch the smoke, which had turned a vivid orange. At 9:12 a.m., the Grandcamp disintegrated in one of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. The blast leveled the port, ignited the nearby Monsanto chemical plant, and sent 2-ton sections of steel whole more than a mile inland. Search and rescue from neighboring towns arrived within hours. Baumgartner and 26 other Texas City volunteer firefighters who had responded to the call were killed instantly. The department had 28 members. Only Fred Dowdy, who had not gone to the initial fire, survived from the roster, and he later coordinated the mutual aid response from communities as far as 60 miles away. The federal investigation concluded the most likely ignition source was a discarded cigarette in the cargo hold. The disaster killed at least 568 people in total, injured about 3,500, and remains the deadliest industrial accident in United States history. The Texas City Fire Department had to be rebuilt from a single surviving member. Delta Flight 191. On August 2, 1985, in North Texas, a line of summer thunderstorms had built up along the approach corridor to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The cells were tall and narrow, producing the kind of heavy rain shafts that radar at the time could not fully characterize. Delta Airlines Flight 191 was a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, inbound from Fort Lauderdale by way of New Orleans, carrying 163 people. In seat 8B was Philip Donald Estridge, a 47-year-old IBM vice president, known across the technology industry as the father of the IBM PC, traveling with his wife Mary Ann. Captain Edward Connors elected to continue the approach into one of the storm cells rather than divert. As the aircraft descended through the cell on final approach to runway 17 left, it encountered a microburst, a narrow column of rapidly descending air pushed straight down by the thunderstorm above it. The downdraft slammed the L-1011 toward the ground. The crew applied full thrust, but airspeed bled off faster than the engines could recover. The aircraft began to sink below the glide path. The TriStar struck the ground just over a mile short of the runway threshold, hit a car on State Highway 114, killing its driver William Mayberry, then bounced into 2 airport water tanks and broke apart. Crash crews from DFW and the surrounding jurisdictions reached the wreckage within minutes. The fire burned through the forward fuselage. Of the 163 people aboard, 136 were killed, including Don Estridge, his wife Marianne, and the entire flight deck crew. Counting the driver on the highway, the total death toll was 137. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the crash resulted from the flight crew's decision to continue the approach into a developing thunderstorm cell, the lack of crew training to recognize and escape a microburst, and the absence of effective wind shear hazard information. The accident triggered the FAA's Airborne Wind Shear Detection Program and the installation of terminal Doppler weather radar at major airports across the country. Phillips Pasadena Complex. On October 23, 1989, in Pasadena, Texas, the Phillips Petroleum Houston Chemical Complex on Jefferson Road was running at full production. Subcontractors from Fish Engineering and Construction were performing scheduled maintenance on a high-density polyethylene reactor. Rodney Gott, a 45-year-old Phillips supervisor, was on shift overseeing the maintenance window. The reactor used isobutane and ethylene under pressure to produce polyethylene resin. At approximately 1:05 in the afternoon, a valve on acetylene leg of the reactor was not properly secured during the maintenance procedure. 85,000 pounds of ethylene and isobutane vapor escaped into the plant in a matter of seconds. The vapor cloud spread across the unit. There were no gas detectors. There were no automatic shutoff systems. Within roughly 2 minutes, the cloud found an ignition source. The explosion registered 3.5 on the Richter scale at the nearest seismograph and was equivalent to roughly 2.5 tons of dynamite. 2 secondary explosions followed as polyethylene reactors and isobutane tanks ruptured, and debris was thrown as far as 6 miles. Houston area fire and emergency crews fought the blaze for 10 hours. Rodney Gott, Stephen Donald Huff, Ruben Quilanton Alamillo, James Edward Allen, and 19 others were killed. 314 people were injured. The OSHA investigation concluded that the explosion resulted from inadequate lockout-tagout procedures, the absence of gas detection in the unit, and Phillips having subcontracted critical safety-sensitive maintenance to Fish Engineering, a contractor with a poor safety record. OSHA proposed penalties of approximately $5.7 million, the largest in the agency's history at that time. The incident drove the Federal Process Safety Management Rules adopted in 1992, the regulatory framework that still governs hazardous chemical plants today. Houston's Southwest Inn. On May 31, 2013, in Southwest Houston, Texas, the Southwest Inn Motel along the Southwest Freeway sat next to a Bojan Indian restaurant that operated out of the same one-story commercial structure. A fire was reported at 12:09 in the afternoon. Captain Matthew Renault of Houston Fire Department Station 51 led the first interior crew through the doors. Renault was 35, a 15-year veteran of the department. With him were engineer-operator Robert Beebe, firefighter Robert Garner, and probationary firefighter Ann Sullivan, who was on her first shift in the field after graduating the academy 3 weeks earlier. The crews advanced hose lines into the restaurant side of the building, working through heavy smoke to locate and contain the fire. The fire had started in a stairwell, and reports had come in that a person might still be inside. Conditions inside deteriorated quickly. The ceiling space above the crew had taken on heat, and it was hiding the true extent of the fire. Visibility dropped to 0. At approximately 12:33 p.m., 12 minutes after the first engine arrived on scene, the roof collapsed onto the interior crew. Captain Renault, Beebe, Garner, and Sullivan were trapped under the debris. Captain Bill Dowling, working a separate hose line a few feet away, was struck and severely burned. A mass rescue operation pulled all 5 firefighters from the building. Renault, Beebe, Garner, and Sullivan were pronounced dead at the scene or shortly afterward. Captain Dowling survived the initial collapse, but lost both legs and suffered traumatic brain injury. He died in 2017 from complications. The Houston Fire Department investigation concluded that the building's unprotected steel truss roof structure had failed under fire load, and that the department needed better construction type recognition and risk-benefit decision-making at commercial fires. It remains the deadliest day in Houston Fire Department history. Hurricane Harvey, Beltway 8. On the morning of August 27, 2017, in Houston, Texas, the rainfall from Hurricane Harvey had stalled directly over Harris County. Bayous were overflowing. Underpasses and low intersections across the metro area were filling with water faster than the drainage could move it. Sergeant Steve Perez was a 34-year veteran of the Houston Police Department, 60 years old, and assigned to traffic enforcement out of the downtown station. He had left his home around 4 in the morning, determined to report for duty during the disaster. Perez drove for about 2.5 hours trying to find a passable route to his station. He stayed in radio contact with command, who urged him to turn back. His wife Cheryl had urged him not to leave that morning, but he had insisted the city needed every officer it could put on the street. Perez became disoriented in the rising water. He turned into the underpass at the Harvey toll road and Beltway 8. Within seconds, his patrol vehicle was overwhelmed by floodwater, roughly 16 feet deep, that had filled the underpass. He tried to escape the vehicle, but he was carried under. Conditions were too dangerous for divers to enter the underpass during the storm. HPD dive teams returned to the underpass 2 days later, on August 29th, when the waters had receded enough to safely search. They recovered Sergeant Perez's body inside his patrol vehicle. The Harris County medical examiner ruled the death an accidental drowning. Harvey killed at least 107 people in Texas and caused an estimated $125 billion in damage. Perez became the 114th Houston Police Department officer to die in the line of duty. At the press conference confirming his death, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo said the department had begged Perez to shelter in place. Perez had answered that the city needed him. Galveston, 1900. On September 8, 1900, in Galveston, Texas, the barometer at the United States Weather Bureau office on the Strand fell through the morning. By early afternoon, a heavy storm tide was running up Galveston Bay from the south, and the Gulf was breaking over the beach houses on the south side of the island. Galveston had no seawall. Cora Mae Ballou Klein was the wife of Isaac Klein, the Weather Bureau's chief meteorologist for Galveston. She was at home at the Klein residence at 25th Street and Avenue Q with the couple's 3 daughters. She was pregnant with their 4th child. Isaac Klein had ridden along the beach during the morning, warning residents to move to higher ground. By early afternoon, he came home. As the storm worsened through the afternoon, approximately 50 neighbors crowded into the Klein house, which had been built with extra reinforcement at Isaac's insistence. The storm surge rose with extraordinary speed. By 6 in the evening, water was running through the streets at chest height. The wind, later estimated at sustained 140 miles per hour, blew the roofs from nearby houses and drove debris through walls. Around 7:30 in the evening, the Klein house was struck by the floating wreckage of a trolley trestle and collapsed. Cora Klein, holding her youngest daughter, was swept into the water with the rest of the household. Isaac, his brother Joseph, and the 3 daughters were eventually pulled onto a floating section of debris and survived. Cora was lost to the surge. Isaac Klein searched the debris fields for days afterward, looking for his wife. Her body was recovered on October 3rd, nearly 4 weeks after the storm, identified by her engagement ring. The United States Weather Bureau and the city of Galveston eventually estimated the storm killed at least 6,000 people, and possibly as many as 12,000, including all 10 Sisters of Charity, and 90 of the 93 children at St. Mary's Orphanage on the west end of the island. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. After the storm, Galveston raised the elevation of the entire city by as much as 17 feet, and built the 17-foot Galveston seawall, the engineering response that has shaped the island's coastline ever since. Stories like this come out regularly. Subscribe to keep up, and suggest the next topic in the comments.